Hey guys, I'm Laura. Thanks for watching this episode of Undistracted. Our guest is Erwin McManus. Erwin is a futurist, a filmmaker, a fashion designer. He also is the lead pastor of MOSAIC, a church community in Los Angeles. And here we are talking about his new book, The Genius of Jesus, a book that takes a look at a quality of Jesus that not everybody acknowledges. And Erwin shares with us how knowing the genius of Jesus can help us discover the unique genius that is in each of us. I hope you enjoy it. Pastor Erwin, thank you so much for joining us on Undistracted. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, so glad to be with you. How strange that we can be in the same place across the world.
It is just so cool. I love that we've been able to make this happen and to talk about something that is just exploring your amazing mind, but also this concept of genius that you see in Jesus. And before we dive into a little bit more of his genius, what is genius to you? What does that sort of concept mean?
Well, genius is one of those concepts where it's very hard to define, but it's easy to identify. And when you see it, because it really is the phenomenon of human capacity that translates from something we thought was impossible that now becomes possible. It can be, Einstein's new way of seeing the universe, or it can be Bobby Fischer's new way of seeing a chessboard, or Picasso's new way of seeing art and painting, or Mozart's way of listening to music and composition. And so it's one of those interesting things where when there's almost an unexpected iteration of human capacity that makes greatness look average, that's when you know it's genius.
And in the names you've listed, and there's so many more beyond that, we don't often see Jesus' name on that same list. So why did you feel like he was someone who needed to be recognized as a genius?
Yes, in all the decades that I've studied human genius, I've never seen any list that listed Jesus. And there's the classic people like Da Vinci, who would always be number one, and Mozart, Picasso, Bobby Fischer, Albert Einstein. It might vary a little further outside of that, but those are sort of like the big five or big six, right? And then you begin to look at genius in other like domains. Whether, let's say, Steph Curry is a genius in basketball, or Tiger Woods was a genius in the arena of golf, or or whether, let's say, Oprah was a genius in the world of communication and engagement, and you can begin to see like different aspects of genius expressed in different arenas. But with Jesus, I even saw Muhammad on a list, and Buddha on a list, Confucius on a list, Mandela on a list, but never Jesus. And so I started wondering to myself, if you did not believe in Jesus being God, if you removed all the divine, all the miraculous, all the magical part of the Bible, right? And only saw Jesus from the historical aspect, would Jesus qualify as a historic genius? And is he off of every list because he isn't a genius? Or is he off of every list because we so emphasize his divinity that we've almost overlooked the extraordinary expression of his humanity? And so that led me to kind of dive into this. So the questions I began to ask myself first were, does Jesus actually qualify as a genius? In fact, when I first mentioned Jesus being a genius from the book, somebody immediately responded on Instagram, Jesus was not a genius, he was God. And I thought, this is a part of the dilemma, is that you somehow think that identifying Jesus as a genius diminishes his divinity. But if I said Jesus was compassionate, you wouldn't say, no, Jesus was not compassionate, he was God. But somehow we see genius and divinity as in conflict with each other. And so I just began through a series of questions. Does Jesus qualify as a historic genius? Secondly, if he does, what is his genius? Because if he is one, that genius has to be actualized in some real domain. And then thirdly, if he is a genius and we can identify that genius? Why has he been left off of every list of geniuses in history? And that really began to drive a lot of the research and a lot of the laying out of the book.
So do you see genius as being a divine quality, for instance, that all of those people that possess some version of it, that's somehow some connection to the divine?
Well, what's really fascinating to me is that not only do I see that, but even the concept of genius was connected to the divine. The ancient Greeks saw that genius was something given to a person by the gods. And so the word genius actually comes from the same etymology as the word genie, that you're endowed with this unique genius, this unique divine capacity. And so the Greeks saw us as the containers of genius, not as necessarily the source of genius. And so they wouldn't say you're a genius, they would say you have a genius.
Right.
And that you're a steward of the genius. So the whole concept of genius was always seen as connected to a fingerprint of God. And I think that's exactly right, that genius is in many ways an aberrant reflection of the nature of God as expressed in humanity.
Because often from a human perspective, we think of genius as someone being super smart. I think of the guy that inspired that Scorpion TV show who just had such a high IQ, or they have extreme creativity. Is our definition of genius perhaps too narrow then if we only assign it to people who show strengths in those particular areas?
Well, since you happen to mention the show Scorpion and about the guy who's a genius, his name is Walter O'Brien. And I know Walter, and we were at dinner one night. He came up to me and he said, people have said that our meeting and having a conversation was inevitable. And so we began talking, and I had just finished talking about human genius. And he said to me, I want to tell you that half of everything you said was wrong. No, and he goes, I disagreed with half of everything you said. And I thought, that's kind of awesome, because he has the highest IQ in the world. So he agreed with half of what I said.
That's not bad.
So I felt like I'm doing good that he agreed with half. And then he said, I can just show you the facts. The facts are against you. And he's exactly right. You see, the facts say that only 2% of people distribute the quality of genius. But there are many other studies that have begun to emerge that show that children under the age of 12 actually express genius as high at 98%. Yeah. And that somehow between our birth and the age of 12, humans go from 98% of us being geniuses to only 2% of us being geniuses. So Walter's right. The facts are against me, but I think the future is for me. And what you look at is that Walter's the classic description of a genius. He's an intellectual genius. He has the cognitive capacity and in a very particular field. But I think we're all beginning to see that genius goes far beyond that, that Picasso is a genius, that Jay-Z is a genius, that Kanye would be the first to tell you he's a genius, and he probably is a genius, that there are physical geniuses, spatial geniuses. Michael Jordan was clearly a genius. And that doesn't mean they're genius in every domain. But they found a domain in which they have a unique expression of human capacity that has never been thought before as possible. And a huge part of what motivates me is a conviction that there is genius inside of every human being. So I don't want to say that everyone's a genius, but I do want to say that there's genius in everyone.
So how do we reclaim that genius? If you think that we're all born with it and then gradually it declines, unfortunately, how do we reclaim it?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, and I'd say you need to read it as a good starting point for people. But I think a huge part of reclaiming it is understanding your essence. You cannot become something you don't know you are. And it's interesting when you just look at modern examples, like George Bush became the president, but his father, George Bush, was the president. You have doctors whose sons become doctors and daughters become doctors. You have presidents whose sons become president. You have athletes whose sons and daughters become athletes. You have artists whose sons and daughters become artists. You know how many people in Hollywood Their fathers are actors, and so they became actors, and their mothers are actresses, so they became an actress. See, once you understand that it's possible, that it's normative, you're more likely to actualize that in your life. And, if you're the son of a genius, you're going to always live in the shadow of that. But at the same time, your expectations of your own capacity are probably much higher. And if we can kind of create a culture that says, we just expect that there's uniqueness in you. So the first thing you have to do is begin to realize, hey, maybe there is something unique in me. Maybe there is an aspect of genius. And I wrote in the book what I think is the most important arena of genius. The most important aspect of genius is human relationships. It's human engagement. I spend time with all these individuals whose companies make minimally $100 million a year. And one of the things I told them, I said, look, the reason you need the genius of Jesus is not so you can make more money because you already know how to make money. It's not so you can be more successful because you're already successful. It's not so you can have more cars or more planes or more houses because you already have all that. The reason you need the genius of Jesus is so you don't die alone.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you that the most significant aspect to me of this book is how Jesus helps us reclaim our humanity. Because the worst decisions we'll make in our lives will not cost us money, they will cost us people. And if we can begin to reclaim the genius of human relationships, of empathy, of knowing how to properly use power, of knowing how to engage one another in a healthy way when it comes to truth, it will actually change our lives and we'll begin to live like geniuses.
And one of the aspects of Jesus' genius that you really make note of is the fact that it was transferable. And maybe that is something that makes him different from all of these other people. What is that quality of transferability? How did Jesus do that? What makes his genius something we can experience?
Well, I think that is, for me, why the book is so hopeful. It would be inspiring if we were just studying Jesus's genius, even knowing it would never have an effect on us other than to inspire us. But the fact that Jesus's genius is the singular genius in all of human history that is transferable, it makes it more than inspiration. It makes it transformational. And when you stop and think, if Picasso said to you, give me 30 years of your life and I'll make you the greatest painter in the world, would you give him those 30 years? If Mozart had said to you, if you give me 20 years of your life, I'll make you the greatest composer that ever lived. If Bobby Fischer had come to you and said, give me your life and I'll make you the greatest chess player who ever lived, frankly, I would have said yes to any one of them, because just to be the best in the world at anything for me would have been worth my entire life. And yet Jesus says, give me your life and I will make you fully human. I will make you the perfect reflection of the image of God within flesh and blood. I will teach you how to live a life of true compassion, of humility, of kindness, of forgiveness, of graciousness. And I will give you a power that goes beyond overpowering, but a power that actually empowers and sets people free. I mean, imagine this invitation from Jesus that I will not only show you my genius, but I will give you my genius. And my genius in you will be transferable. And I can't believe we get this kind of invitation from Jesus and we so rarely say yes.
Do you think it's because people maybe stumble over the idea of Jesus being God? If you're a Christian, if you're a person of faith, maybe that's easy to believe. But if you're not, perhaps that is something that makes people think, well, I want Jesus' genius, but I don't want to recognize that he could be God.
Well, I don't know if people are really stumbling over whether they believe Jesus is God. I think they're stumbling over why we don't look as much like Jesus as we should if we say we follow him. That's actually what people stumble over. And so the first thing I want to do is fix that. I want to make sure that we're reflecting that genius in our lives every day so that our lives become magnetic and we become proof of genius. And because if it's when you hold up the Mona Lisa, it becomes a proof of Da Vinci's genius. And when you look at the Sistine Chapel, you have proof of Michelangelo's genius. And your life and my life as we've been transformed by Jesus, is supposed to be the Sistine Chapel. We are supposed to be the Mona Lisa. We're supposed to be the reflection of the genius of Jesus lived out in real life. And when we begin to live a life of love, when we begin to live a life where we're filled with joy and hope and meaning, we begin to live out that genius. So we become proof of the genius of Jesus. And for me, that's very exciting, and I think that is also like very compelling that we could be proof of the genius of Jesus in our lives. I think for many people who are searching for God, they're trying to figure out the disconnect between what they hear about Jesus and what they see about followers of Jesus, and how does that reconcile? And a part of it is just realizing they don't understand, because we've miscommunicated it, that Jesus works through really imperfect, broken, fragmented materials. And that God actually doesn't look for perfect people who have it all together to reflect him. He looks for really broken, imperfect people who are willing to humble themselves and say, God, I'm a mess. Can you make a masterpiece for my life? And that the masterpiece is not hiding the imperfection. The masterpiece is actually celebrating the imperfection, because God was not limited by it.
Right. And there's a really interesting line in the book where you say that if genius was touched by madness, then it's also touched by the divine. What's the connection between madness and divinity?
Yeah, I think that there's a real practical connection here, because when you have talent or greatness or genius without character, it does lead us to a sense of madness. And there's a pretty strong assessment that that people only mature to the level of their success. And so if you become successful at 13 or 14, you don't necessarily mature beyond that. If you become successful at 16 or 17, you don't mature beyond that. That's why a lot of actors, a lot of athletes struggle with a deep level of immaturity, because they've achieved success so early. That's why a lot of prodigies who are geniuses at a very early age end up living really broken and fragmented lives, because their emotional well-being and their emotional maturity didn't develop. And so I think that the madness comes when you think your talent can exist in a healthy way without your character. And the touch of the divine comes when you allow God to transform your character so that it has a foundational capacity to carry talent and carry genius and to keep you healthy and growing.
So I was going to ask you then what the markers are that you are living in genius. If you're somebody specifically wanting to emulate Jesus' genius, for instance, what would be the things that really tell you you've got there? Is living with character then probably one of those main markers, hallmarks?
Yeah, I actually think it's something so unromantic as character.
Of course.
And, man, I just wish that, that the genius was just an expression of creativity. But creativity really does come out of character, and good or bad. And if you want a sustainable life where that genius keeps growing and growing and growing, you have to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I found, even like in my own life, and this is a part of what suddenly inspired me to write the book, was, I was a straight D student, first through 12th grade. I barely graduated from high school. I didn't go to college right away. I begged my way into school. And no one would have ever put me in a category, not only of not a genius, but not even very smart, maybe actually really mentally challenged. And been married 40 years. And along the way, my wife would say to me, "What happened to you?" Like what, she would literally say, something happened to you. You didn't always think like this, or you didn't always create like this, or you didn't always see like this. And it's always nice to have the person who lives with you to like acknowledge that something has changed, something has grown, something's different. And I began to realize that a huge part of it was I just believed that what God was calling me to become as a man, as a human being, was the best thing for me and the best thing for the world. I didn't know how much smarter it would make me. Like I didn't know that like making good choices would create such a good future. I didn't know that like loving truth and living a life of integrity and treating people with kindness and making people more valuable than success or things. I didn't know that it ended up looking like genius later.
Right.
And I, and I certainly didn't know that living a life of love was the greatest act of genius. And that's what in the book I do write that I think empathy is the highest expression of intelligence. And you can read and study and amass data and information, but if you don't learn the depth and the texture of human relationships, you're just not going to be. You're not going to have the level of genius that God created you to have.
It's a really encouraging example to think that you can go from sort of zero and build up to genius, as opposed to having to have genius and then express it. It's actually something you can gradually acquire or gradually sort of develop in, I suppose.
Yeah, and just think about practical areas. Like imagine what a better husband a man becomes when he makes loving his wife his highest value in their relationship, rather than what she can do for him, but what he can do for her. And all of a sudden you just become a relational genius. When you're parenting and your kids are not an intrusion in your life, and they're not an obligation, but they're actually a gift to you. And you actually love your kids and you spend time with them, you invest in them, you just become a great parent. It's like, it's funny. It becomes the most practical kind of genius you could ever ask for.
And on that note, what do you think the practical application of genius is? Why would it be something worth attaining beyond, making millions and you kind of getting that kind of sort of secular success, you might call it? How should genius be practically applied?
Well, I mean, that's why I was talking about just relationships, but I just want to go back. I don't even want to say that that's secular success, because I think there are Christians that should make billions of dollars because they'll do more good with that money than other people who don't have the right value systems. And so I invest in a lot of business guys, and I want them to be super successful, but I want to make sure they have a spirit of generosity and character to carry that wealth. And so I'm all for, I want the best directors and the best filmmakers and, the best fashion designers in the world. And because I think that that's the world in which genius is really admired. And, the crazy thing is that if you express genius in one area, people will listen to you about anything. And, and so if I can design a great jacket, it's amazing how that jacket, because it'll inspire people with a touch of genius, I can talk to them about Jesus, because they immediately give you credibility across the board. And it's one of the reasons I think it's important for Christians to actually nurture genius in our children. It's actually important to nurture genius in our communities. We have to stop telling people that, good enough is good enough for God. You don't have to be great. I actually think we need to inspire and create environments where that genius is nurtured and developed, because genius gives you a platform from which to speak about anything that really matters.
And it's something that we do often attribute to the sort of big ideas, these big concepts. But I also think that some people would just want to be a genius so that they could answer the simple questions of life. What am I meant to do? What am I meant to be? What is the right choice to make? How do you see that quality of genius helping us with some of those sort of practical little questions?
Yeah, I think it's actually being thoughtful in everything we do. I've had a lot of meals that lacked genius, but there's something amazing. Like when my wife, she's right now in Africa building a school there and actualizing her genius there by mobilizing good across the world. But sometimes she'll be home and she'll decide to cook. And when she makes food, it creates warmth for our whole family. It brings us together. There's just a deep sense of love. And I think that the genius of the small things is something we should never overlook. It's taking time to be thoughtful and to care for each other and to pay attention to details. And everything in my life that matters to me, the details actually matter. There's people who say, no, I'm a visionary, that, I'm not a detail person. Look, I'm a visionary where details matter. Because when you love something, the details matter. And I'd say it's like in everyday life, when I take out the garbage, my wife feels profoundly loved. It doesn't seem like that'd be a work of genius, but let me tell you, sometimes we're just so dumb we don't understand the simple acts of love and the simple things that make our relationships better. The nuances of saying things in a certain way, even when you're criticizing someone, to say it with affirmation and affection and respect. And it does take a level of genius to make sure your words always strengthen a person rather than breaks them down. And I think those everyday things are really important, and that there is a genius that I think is undeveloped and unused in everyday life.
And one of the aspects of your own genius, I would say, that a lot of people really admire is the way you rebel against being accepted by everybody, being liked by everybody, being understood by everybody. It's kind of a definite hallmark of the work that you do. And one thing that you do say in your book is that the more you live your life for acceptance, the more you relinquish your uniqueness. So why is our uniqueness something that you see being valuable?
By the way, thank you so much for reading the book so carefully. That's a very important, that's a nuance not a lot of people would pull out right away. And I love when I talk to someone that actually has taken time to look at the content. So thank you so much. And yes, I think that's one of the most important things I talk about in the book, that you're going to eventually have to choose between acceptance and uniqueness. And I don't say that or write that because I want that to be true. I wish it wasn't true. When I came to faith in Jesus, I wanted so desperately to be accepted and loved by the tribe of Jesus. And as I moved forward and pursued truth and tried to be super passionate, and engaged, and creative in my expression of my faith, I found very, very quickly that I was given a choice within our own faith. You either conform and are accepted, or you choose to create, and you'll be oftentimes considered or pushed to the outside. And I cannot tell you how many times in my life I've been told I was a heretic, and then years later people would agree and go, no, this is biblical. It just wasn't orthodox. And I had to finally accept in my own life. I'm 63 years old, and I'm still designing clothes and writing books and working on a graphic novel and leading a community called MOSAIC. That's one of the most peculiar churches in the world. And I just decided a long time ago that I could not live my life for acceptance, because average is acceptable by everyone. But exceptional will always create dissonance and turbulence. And if you want to truly be great at something, you have to be willing to let go of being liked by everyone.
And one of the greatest aspects of grace that the greatest aspects of genius that you bring up is the genius of grace, which I think is something that in our day and age, in our cancel culture driven world, unfortunately, grace is something that would really set you apart. So if you're wanting to adopt that quality of grace, how do you do that and also still hold true to belief and conviction?
Yeah, I find grace to be a pretty extraordinary concept that I think it's hard to unwrap because we know it so well. We talk about grace all the time, right? And sometimes when you talk about something all the time, it loses its power. And as I think about it, and I always try to think of things as an anthropologist before I think of it as a theologian. And as an anthropologist, I think it's a really interesting thing to love someone that doesn't deserve it, to forgive someone who hasn't earned it, and to trust someone who yet hasn't proven themselves. Grace has a universe of dynamics that are almost irrational. And but what grace does do is it elevates the possibility for the other person. And because when I mess up, my inner world tells me this is who I am. And grace tells me, no, you're better than this. Grace tells me, no, you get to try again. Grace tells me it's not over. I was watching this series called The Morning Show. and I don't want to like be a spoiler, but there's a certain point where one of the characters says, I need to know someone believes I can be better. I want to be a better human being. I need one person in the world who will believe that I can be better. And because there was no one, that person took their life. And I thought, whoever wrote this understands the depth of human despair. See, it isn't often that you've given up on yourself. It's that you feel like the world has given up on you. And that the possibility of you changing, that oxygen in the room is gone. And if you believe that one more person, that there's just one person who believes you can be more, that you can be better, that you can change, you can grow, it's amazing how powerful that sense of hope is. And I think grace is the context from which hope always lives in a very practical and powerful way.
And is that the thing that you think is most transferable about Jesus' own genius, that he's able to freely offer grace?
I think all 6 chapters, there are 8 chapters, but 6 of those are strokes of genius that I think are completely transferable from Jesus to us. And I think all of them are, I think they're equally powerful, but they're not equally powerful at the same time in everyone's life. I think that part of the dynamic of the book is that sometimes one aspect of that genius becomes more essential to your life than another time. There'll be times in your life you need grace way more than other times. There'll be times in life you need to give grace more powerfully than other times. But I think it's like a universe of virtues that a person takes on, that Jesus changes us. Because, you never know when you're going to have to forgive. You always have to forgive at the most inconvenient time, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there is never a convenient time to have to give grace to someone who doesn't deserve it.
Yeah.
There's never a convenient time to have to forgive a person who, didn't earn it, right? And, love is inconvenient, right? And empathy is inconvenient. All of these aspects are incredibly inconvenient. So if you wait until you need them to take them on, it'll be too late.
Yeah. It's so true.
You have to take these on as the essence of who you are and the way you live your life, so that when that genius is needed, it's ready.
It has been a pleasure, Erwin, hearing more of your heart behind genius, your heart behind this book. And as we wrap it up, I just want to ask you something that I ask many of our guests, and that is, what would it mean to you to be living an undistracted life, one that is fully about your purpose and fully about the things that you feel drawn toward?
What a great question. And I like the way you accidentally defined what we would be distracted by. And because, you might think the distractions could be social media or television, or the distractions could be money or fame or power. But really, the real distractions are all the other voices that call you to be something you were not created to become. And so I think for me, my most undistracted life comes when I don't allow outside voices to shape my intention, but I have such a strong intention in my life that I listen to the voices that resonate with that intention and that move me toward that intention. And I silence the voices that would call me to relinquish that sense of purpose and intention in my life.
That, I think, is one of my favorite answers I've ever had. Erwin, thank you so much for your time today and for The Genius of Jesus. It's a fantastic book, and I encourage everyone to go and check it out. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Erwin. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss an episode, and subscribe to Undistracted wherever you listen to your podcast. I'd love to see you there as well. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.